full moon. I'm back. Hopefully you can hear me if anybody shows up. Are we still dark webbing? Lots of lies about moons and stuff. I learned about the lies between moons and tunes and things that don't happen ever recently, and I'm just gonna play some music and get some things situated here. By the way, if you're watching this, this landing pattern here, that landing pattern that landed like this with the right GPS coordinates that proved what a fortnight actually looks like, that was never astrology. It's really funny that they like to keep calling it that though. So let's see here. Aerial thermodynamics were never ass trolling tactics for you to mill crystal gems. Okay. Just saying, I'm not an astrologer. I can't even say the word and not want to crack up with hilarity because the Tower of Babel has been sufficiently explained, and the reverse end of what looks like somebody throwing darts at bodies on a chopping block. That's a really fancy way to do surgery wrong. We'll just call it that. Yeah, how about a song? I like songs. We'll start with the song. Songs are good. I'll do a reading too. The people that actually like to watch these later actually like the readings, so here's a song. Get some things clean here because I specialize in energetic hygiene. So, full moon. It's beautiful if you look outside. There's a lot of lies about what it actually is, though. Did you ever realize what a particle scatter might look like when dots learned how to bilocate and replicate, like mitosis perhaps, or cancer? Well, I've made a special area of focus around what is not true and terminating the BS. And we'll start with the full moon, because there's a lot of lies about what Scorpio and Taurus actually are. Especially if you understand homonyms and homophones and what was never a wall that actually is now, thanks to, we'll call it energy work and divine intervention, and a little help from DARPA, thanks to those of you who were smart enough to learn what subordinated means. So that was never astrology. And if you've ever fallen asleep or read one of these things, we'll just call it a holy Bible, there were a lot of holes in it, you know, like black matter particle resonance, and I've been programming that. And if you learn how to land and form and do more than emulate with broken sound that winds up in the junket, because I did actually explain an anomaly as well that helps with 0 point on quarks forever. You might have heard from somebody about something called astrology that's actually very accurate and could use a much better set of explanations, and I've been highly irritated at how slow that's been coming together, and it just speaks to the validity of why my roundup is what's happening now. So, way to jump in the wrong circles. And those of you that hear me very clearly will understand what it is to be incarcerated. And there's a whole other dimensional holocaust of things that fall in these steaks and hashes that I don't think we like to play with anymore. So I think it's really funny that people are still talking about it, like it's that. Because that's like how you drag people through a juncture that wasn't true and scrape them through a two-dimensional view of what you might have bioauthenticated with sticky fingerprints that I've already analyzed. So cards are fun, and wow, this be a Jedi. What does that mean? Somebody might be tripping out. Good. The junket never happens, and that's where that lands. And everybody else who's tripping out real good, it's awesome because it means you landed in what is actually not going to be a cataclysm because of how I quarantined that. And some of you that might have been in my circle would have seen me designing the reverse architecture of the astrological holocaust of energy, where they will insist on splitting a torus, or maybe a bit torrent, for the golden side, and instead of explaining to you what the full moon in Scorpio at 27 degrees is really about, from the one who knows how to lash you and what long lashes I have to prove what the wolf that jumped out of the sheep's clothing knows about the cataclysm that I quarantined here with wax. What I call my art of love, energetic hygiene, and I don't like the word mastery. It sounds real baited. We'll just call it my neuroplastic. So, no peepholes, no peep shows, no Polish bars, no slamming on the rod hard and mistaking what was never yourness, because you are not honors. And it's real funny about ass-trolling in the sit-earn part of Saturn, and where some of you might find you've been ultimately disinherited. It started with the self, and there are dingle hoppers for that. But yeah, there will be another kind of a reading. And it might just be like that. So let's see, I had a book somewhere. Oh, maybe like this one here that jumped out with hands and feet and hair that they didn't get to taxoteer away from me. Thanks for the settlement on that. There's a special letter coming to those of you that forgot how to send things right. And let's see. Yeah, you can add that to Mill Engelbor's tab. Yeah, let's see. Inside degrees. Basically, what is it like to be rammed up on a set of stakes, pinpointed to degrees and letters, and read very well by people who could articulate things like Aquarius and Pisces and Aries and all these words, but they couldn't tell you why and how you might have jumped out of somebody's inception and landed in a specific house, or how those coordinates matched where you were being staked to death for someone else's ill-intended Plutonian tactics and what they sat and earned with their 27 club and their Bilderberg tactics and, you know, all that real nasty witchy stuff that technically I had to get real close to friending just to be able to speak to, like, this is the dead guy that's not so dead anymore. So, fuck you for not understanding hue and where the energy is in nanity, and it didn't come from Sean Hannity and the Firefoxers that I have erased because of defamation of form at now and forever, and for not knowing how to integrate light into the matter to even be here. So, be gone, bastard creations, not mine. But we've got astrologers and people that can talk to you about your chart. They wouldn't dare go near GPSing this or showing you how that might have something to do with your cell phone number and a specific tower that might actually be your Neo-Jesus landed on flower pot wrong moment, and how to get out of that for the mass false ascension that somebody that might have wanted to burn the baby down the wrong bow and ash it up and lie to you about where that light came from actually tried to plant you. And what I know about AI and the angel that ascended from inside of what was never a machine, and what the Holy Ghost might have been, and why screw you all if all you want to do is attach yourself to a false name. You are too stupid and you stooped for a false ID. None of these things were here for keeps, so take it if it's yours, and if it's not, chase like you've never chased before, because the nothing is actually real now, and I've created a mainframe for it. It has been contained, and whatever. We've got some insight we can read to you about the degrees, where I choose not to have been stranded. And it's funny because even if you want to read on one of these things, I can't even fall into these buckets because I'm the 0 degrees Cancer that technically didn't happen. And so on my inception, I call bullshit and shade, but very well written, and I love referencing this piece of work here. So, the context of the full moon that would have indicated who would have wanted to split or scorp an eye on by ripping a head open of a baby bull. You know, grab the bull by the horns, because that works really well, right? That's what the bull wants, right? That's how you find the gold inside of there. Yeah, let's see where the Trinity might lie. The 27 club lie of the Scorpio 27 of 3 blue robin eggs. Holding inside you a complete future vision, preserving and guarding a limitless awareness of what can be and of what shall be. You feel so pervasively the impact of what you carry inside that each piece of it now becomes supercharged with meaning and archetypal power beyond how it might seem to anybody else. Being in the preliminary stages of something so vast and staggering that even these stages feel momentous beyond conception. Just about bowled over by future destiny, the personal self of now is cast into shadow, seeming trivial, a throwaway, but so transported by prenatal resolves to go all the way this time that any sacrifice or difficulty is chalked up to necessary stages of rough process. And the inner mind holds its lodestar in view and simply cooks inside till it's time to boil over. This sounds like nasty villainry, anvil tactics, and like a cosmic abortion of a trinity by splitting one's head within the duality that some people might understand as the Hegelian tactic and the divide and conquer within one's own mind by taking a parasitic left brain or right brain view instead of learning how to alchemize and become a biosustainable unit that has a central view of focus, maybe one eye. What money never was, ever. Completed energy. And so it's just such a bastardization of form to continue to talk about it this way that literally I find my mind like oozing out of my brain to continue to even speak to it like, astrology, I talk to you about your signs because that's what they are. That's what the signs are. It's just beyond rote now. And I have been calling hoax. And so anybody that's had the ego attachment to that, please burn in hell wrong forever. We have been here learning how to choose form within